Hey guys, so what you're about to watch is a discussion that I had with Stephen and Alex, Rationality Rules and Cosmic Skeptic, on the topic of abortion. This video is a little bit later than the other two, because I'll be honest, I'm not happy with it. We had audio issues, we had camera issues. It was like 1 AM when we were filming this and we were all really tired. It had been a long day. But mostly, this wasn't the discussion I had planned. This wasn't the discussion I was prepared for. And so I do feel like I was a little bit kind of caught off guard with it. And I haven't wanted to post it because it doesn't feel like the type of content that's right for my channel. And any other time I would have just scrapped the video, but obviously I can't do that in this case and it's something you guys want to see. I think there are some interesting points brought up on like all sides, especially the sides opposing me. I think it did make me rethink certain parts of my like opinion or view or whatever. It did challenge me a bit, but ultimately the problem is that I don't think it touches on the topics that I wanted to speak about. What you're going to be seeing is kind of like abortion from like kind of a purely like I'm saying like a lot, almost like a purely philosophical perspective, which isn't my way of doing things, you know that. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just not the sort of thing I'd normally put on my channel. I think there's a place for people to have those discussions. I just don't think this is it. For me, when we talk about the issue of abortion, it's not just this philosophical or moral issue. It's not just a matter of like, what's the right thing to do? Because sometimes the right thing to do isn't always possible. You'll see later in the video, like much later in the video, I bring up the issue of, you know, budget and things like that, especially in the UK, and how, you know, if we did just stop abortions, what a strain that would put on our economy. And it's very easy for someone to turn around and say, oh, but, you know, that's not why people are opposed to abortion, and, you know, that's not the issue here. But I think it is. I think if you're going to sit there and take a pro-life stance, and you're going to say abortions are wrong and blah, 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 and argue that we shouldn't have abortions, then you also need to tell me, where is the money going to come from to look after all those new kids? You can't just talk about the morals and the philosophy as a hypothetical, because when it comes to something like abortion, this is a real issue affecting real people's lives on a daily basis. And sometimes that does mean making hard and difficult decisions, which might not be right for everyone. But in a real world, you have to be practical about it. And that's why I don't think it's wrong to bring up issues like budgeting and politics and emotions. Abortion isn't just this hypothetical moral question. It's a real issue facing real people. It is a social issue, a political issue, an emotional issue. It's a medical issue, a biological issue, an economic issue. It's not just about these hypothetical moral scenarios. That's why I think I'm a bit frustrated with this video. Because I feel like a lot of the time philosophical fluff is thrown around and the hard science is ignored. I've had so many different people saying different things to me before they've even seen this video, and it's so... I don't know how to get my head around it. God's sake. I have so many people saying, oh, you must be afraid to post it because Alex clearly ripped you apart in it and showed you up for how stupid you are. And then I have like Stephen saying to me, oh no, don't worry, you have nothing to worry about. And I'm like, I don't care about the wrong and the right. My problem is that like, I don't feel that Alex ripped me apart in this discussion. I just think he was taking the conversation in a different direction from what I was prepared for. I'm not afraid to post this because I get ripped apart. I'm not proud to post this because this isn't the video I wanted to make. That said, like, this isn't me trying to say anything negative against Alex or Stephen or anything. Like, they're different creators to me and we have different viewpoints. And like I say, it's good to be challenged, but I don't know, I don't feel like this is a helpful, useful discussion, but you know what, I'm just gonna say like I'm just gonna say screw it at this point and post it, and you guys can make up your own mind. But I just want to warn you, there are some major audio issues we had with Stephen's microphone. Our cameras just gave up at the end because it was the middle of the night, and I think I was close to giving up as well. It's been weeks now, and I'm just fed up of rewatching this discussion and not being happy with it, and yeah. I think maybe if you guys want it at some point, it would be interesting to do another video on abortion that I'm actually kind of happier with, that touches on the big issues that I want to talk about, that touches on, the proper biology, that touches on the science, the social aspect, the emotional aspect, the economic aspect, the political aspect, as well as the moral stuff, I think it's probably fair to say that some of my arguments in this come from a place of being too emotional about it. I think it's fair to say that some of Alex's arguments come from a place of, youthful naivety. I think Stephen is probably the most reasonable one in the video. Annoyingly, his is the microphone that wasn't working properly, so it's so frustrating. I just want to make it clear that, when I say I'm frustrated with this video and I don't think it works and I don't like it and I'm not happy with it, it's no disrespect to Alex and Stephen. It's not their fault. Perhaps I should have done a better job of, guiding the discussion where I wanted it to go, but apparently I'm not, a strong enough person to do that. Yeah, I don't know, what can I say, this sort of thing, these kind of discussion-y debate type things aren't my forte. I've been very open and honest about that. And I was like, I'll give it a go for this, but apparently, yeah, everything that I thought could go wrong did go wrong. So it's taught me a lesson. I think it's also worth mentioning at this point, because I don't think it's kind of a counterpoint I bring up until much later on, if I ever manage to bring it up at all. I don't know, I've not got to that point in the editing yet, but there's a whole kind of reoccurring analogy that Alex brings up when talking about human life, saying oh, well, it's like a grain of sand versus a pile of sand. When does it become a pile of sand? I don't think that's an accurate analogy to make with a fetus, a baby, a human being. It's more like, I think the analogy I used was, it's more like a burrito. When does it become a burrito? You start off with a grain of sand. Sorry, you start off with a grain of rice, and then that becomes, a whole parcel of rice. You have the wrap, you have the vegetables, you have the meat, you have some sauce or whatever. At what point does it become a burrito? Is the rice on its own a burrito? Is a large amount of rice a burrito? Or does it only become a burrito when it's wrapped in a little wrap? Does it only become a burrito when you add meat and vegetable? Does it only become a burrito when you add sauce or whatever? It can be a burrito without some of those things, it can only be a burrito when you have certain things, and so it's more of a mix of all the things together and defining different circumstances and how, different collections of different things make up a burrito. It's the same in a fetus, I think. It's not just a bundle of cells growing into a bigger bundle of cells. It's not accurate to say it like that, because it all depends on the cells becoming organs and tissues and specializing in different ways. And, it's not even just cells becoming a brain. It's cells becoming a brain that can, that has a consciousness, that can feel pain, that can understand pain, that all the other things, and that's just one tiny thing. So yeah, I thought that was worth mentioning now, because it's something that I was thinking about constantly every time Alex brought that up, but I don't know if I ever did or not. So I just thought it was something maybe worth bearing in mind. I don't know, I'm doing this rambling thing now. I don't know why I feel like I have to, defend myself in a video that should rightly be, my own, but I don't know. I don't think this video gets the best versions of any of us or any of our opinions across, and that's why I don't like it. Anyway, screw it, here we go. This is the abortion video that you all wanted. yeah. I'd say enjoy, but yeah. Hey guys, I am here in Alex's garden with Alex.
That's right. Yeah.
This guy.
At night.
At night. It's currently late because we spent a whole day talking about some really light, cheerful topics. Nothing too serious. Just veganism and like nihilism and why nothing matters and why we're wrong and
Yeah, well, you're wrong, but being wrong means nothing, so that's okay. Yeah.
No. I am joined by the wonderful Stephen Woodford, also known as Rationality Rules, and Alex O'Connor, also known as Cosmic Skeptic. For all I've been giggling, we are going to be talking about something pretty serious today, and that is the topic of abortion. It is very controversial, but I have some pretty strong opinions on it, and I think you guys do too.
Well,
maybe
fair to say, perhaps. I'm sort of
you could have an opinion.
exploring the possibilities. So.
You're exploring abortion.
You could phrase it that way, I suppose. Yes.
Yeah, I think my position is, I've got some things I'm pretty certain on.
I think that I've been the more I've been thinking about it, I've come to realise that something that nobody really does. I think it is possible to make a pretty strong secular pro-life case, and I think in this video, perhaps for sake of being a contrarian at the very least, I think I'd like to explore some of those ideas, see what you guys have to think about them.
That's interesting.
It's really a kind of question for me of exploring limits and exploring definitions. So
I think kind of like one of the big things I want to kind of like get out of like explain to you is that I think when it comes to something like abortion, it's not a pro-life, pro-choice thing in terms of like there's no one size fits all for everybody. I think it's a very, very like personal thing for the woman and in a lot of cases for the man involved as well. And I think it kind of needs to be considered, especially when it comes to like asking, is it right or wrong, should it be allowed? It needs to be considered on a case by case basis. There's no like all abortion is okay or no abortion is okay. And that's why I think having the option for women to get an abortion, like, you know, by law in a country is important. But I also think it's important there are rules in place. I think the UK's laws are pretty good, but they're not perfect, and that's something I want to talk about today. So we're going to be kind of like looking at the laws that are currently in place in the UK. The US is like a whole other kind of kettle of fish. So we're not going to be touching on that too much. We're just going to be kind of like looking at the UK. We're going to be looking at the kind of like biology behind like pregnancy and when abortions can take place, and we're going to be looking kind of like a little bit at the process of abortion because it's not nice, but in some cases it is necessary.
So would that mean in the law case we're looking at primarily in the UK, or maybe even exclusively, but philosophically it's the same?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. I think the laws of the, because we were talking privately momentarily ago about the common conflation between what is legal and what is moral, which is a fatuous thing to do. But in the case when you're discussing something like abortion, it's important to bring up the laws, and so we can focus on UK law. But I think when we start getting into the philosophical case, it really, obviously, it applies wherever you are, you know. So, yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
And then I want to touch on looking at some of the actual like statistics and how abortion affects like the UK economy. And it's a very kind of like practical way of looking at things, but I think it's a very important one. And a lot of people object to the NHS paying for abortions, but I would argue that it's better that the NHS do that than we put more money into if those babies have been born. But we'll get to that in a minute because it's a pretty complicated thing. So to start with, how long is a pregnancy?
9 months, isn't it?
Give me in weeks.
40 weeks is, I believe. Or thereabouts. So obviously it varies every now and again.
How long is the baby growing for on average before it pops out?
Well, I suppose it depends when you begin to consider it to be a baby.
Is it a full thing, like it grows very quickly?
Well, that's the thing. Pregnancy is counted as 40 weeks, but the baby is only growing for 38. This is why you have to be.
2 weeks if no growth is there.
This is why you have to be very, very careful about talking about weeks of pregnancy and age of the fetus, because they're different. A woman's pregnancy is counted from the last day of her last period, but conception normally happens 2 weeks after that, when a woman ovulates. So there's technically 2 weeks of pregnancy when she's not pregnant. So a 2-week-old fetus is very, very different to 2 weeks of pregnancy.
Right, yes. Yeah, that's an important distinction to make.
So 8 weeks of pregnancy is a 6-week-old fetus.
I think just for the sake of clarity, if I say quickly and under my breath, 2 weeks in, or something of that sort, then I'm talking about 2 weeks into a fetus growing.
Yeah.
You know, so but that's important, just in case people get confused about that.
Okay. So like that is worth kind of bearing in mind, because when I talk about things like statistics of like under 10 weeks of pregnancy, that means when the fetus is 8 weeks old or younger, basically. So stuff like that is important. Right. Okay. In the UK, let's talk a little bit about laws. Is it legal to get an abortion? Just for any woman to go out and get an abortion?
Doesn't it depend on context?
So there are a few qualifications you have to hit. Firstly, if it's before 24 weeks, for any reason, you can go ahead and do it. But as long as you get 2 signatures from a doctor.
To put it bluntly, would that mean, as far as the law is concerned, the reason could be that you were raped by someone and you want to get rid of the...
It could be whatever you want, as long as it's 24 weeks.
You just decided you haven't got the economic situation to support another mouth, therefore you want it as well. It's the same thing according to the law at that point.
That's
Absolutely.
not true.
It's not true, is it?
That's not true.
Okay, yeah.
It is illegal for a woman to get an abortion in the UK unless it fits certain criteria, like you said. Yeah. But ultimately, it is illegal. But like we say, there are these amendments. So in the UK, a woman can't just go and get an abortion for any reason. It's not like in America where it's just abortion on demand. Yeah. So in order for a woman to get an abortion, ideally it has to be under 24 weeks. Most abortions are under 24 weeks, except in really extreme circumstances. I think it's something like 96-point-something% are under 24.
Question to that. Philosophically speaking, do you agree that it should be that way?
24 weeks.
Or do you agree that there should be a reason for it? Or do you think it's a woman's right to the point where they can do what they want until a certain time?
I agree there should be a limit, and I think 24 weeks is good for now.
But would you say before 24 weeks, you'd say women can do what they want, their body?
I think
yes.
I think perhaps we should get into
We are. Just curious.
There's a biological reason why, and we'll get to it in a minute. Yeah, if that's okay. So basically, as long as it's under 24 weeks, and I'm just going to read this out, and the continuation of the pregnancy would involve risk greater than if the pregnancy was terminated of injury to the physical or mental health of the pregnant woman or any existing children of her family, the abortion will be granted.
But there are already problems with that. For instance, how on earth can you judge greater than the stress, for instance, like mental stress, greater than the life of a child?
So
what
is that level?
No, it's not greater than the life of the child. It's greater than if
carrying it through.
Yeah. So basically, they're saying, like, let's take the woman's mental health, for example. Okay, they're saying, you know, if she continues with this pregnancy, how is her mental health likely to, you know, change? Is she likely to get depressed? Is she likely to want to kill herself, hurt herself?
It's saying like
it's not putting it above the child. The child's kind of not involved in this bit.
So what does it have to be greater than? That stress?
Greater than if the pregnancy was terminated. So if a woman goes in and she's like, you know, upset, she's depressed, she's saying, I'll kill myself if I have to have this baby.
Oh, so you mean greater than the stress she would feel by having the abortion?
Yeah.
Oh, well then that basically is do it when you like, surely, because you could think, well, I'll be slightly inconvenienced if I have this pregnancy, and I'll be not bothered at all if I have the abortion, and therefore
pregnancy is a lot more.
Therefore, it's outweighed.
Yeah, of course, and that's why there's like a weakness to it, and that's why it's very difficult to kind of accurately judge. But at the same time, I don't think a pregnancy is a slight inconvenience.
No, not at all. I would never say that people, even a significant minority of people saying that, but I'm saying it could happen.
Oh, of course,
because of the elastic nature of that rule, am I right in thinking that basically means, for all intent and purposes, you can have one up to 24 weeks? You just have to jump through this hoop.
I mean, that seems a non-rule. If all you have to do is say that, you know, I will be...
The fact that the fact that there are rules there are meant to kind of deter you from just having an abortion on a whim. But this is kind of like where I have mixed opinions, like mixed feelings, because on the one hand I'm like, okay, maybe this encourages people to be more irresponsible or blah blah blah, but I'm like, you know what, maybe it's not the role of abortion laws to decide whether people should be irresponsible or not. Maybe that's down to better sex education. People need to be reminded that there are better contraceptive methods than abortion. Abortion is horrific, and I don't think anyone goes into it lightly. It is a last resort.
No one wants one, do they?
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I think this is possibly the best rule they can make at the minute. That's the best for the most amount of people. It's not perfect. It's not going to be right for everyone, but...
So basically, we established that you can have an abortion for 24 weeks without good reason. You can.
Well, I wouldn't say it's without good reason.
Well, it could be. As Alex was saying, couldn't someone just go, I'd be more inconvenienced by having the baby than if I didn't.
Which it seems the law defines as a good reason. Yeah. So there's your good reason, I suppose.
Well, I think, to be honest, it kind of is a good reason, because if a woman's not ready to have a baby, she's not going to be a good parent.
I think the thing that's been left out here that can't be left out is, when is it a baby and when is it a fetus?
That's what we're going to get to in a second, yeah.
That's the most important question.
There has to be some reason to think it's over that 20-week period, because otherwise...
Yeah.
If that's an arbitrary limit...
If that's pulled out of anywhere, some seriously...
No, there's a hell of a lot of science in this.
Agree with you saying that,
No, I agree.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a hell of a lot of like research gone into this, right? And like it's still heavily debated. No one's set on anything in particular. But I just kind of want to talk to you about a few of these things for now. So I'll tell you a little bit about some of the research that's been done, some of the things that they've found, and then we can see what you think. So there's quite a bit to take in, but let's just go for it, okay? Most lawmakers agree that abortion can be carried out on fetuses, until fetuses can be viable outside of the womb. That means that they could survive if they were taken out of the womb by themselves without, it's really hard to describe this without getting kind of like too technical, but you know, there is like life support and stuff, and you can help some babies breathe and things like that, but there's a certain point where even that's not going to do anything. And is
that a lack of technology, is it, or is it
that's part of it. Part of it's lack of...
lately they basically took all the way a lamb. Sorry.
Yeah.
Right term for it. They took it all the way from conception outside of the womb.
Yeah, so that's kind of like one of the big issues I have, because I've always said, like, you know, as long as it's kind of reliant on the mother's womb and the body, it is essentially like a little bit parasitic if you don't want it. I think it's very important to know that, like, when we attach like emotional kind of connections to things, it differs, but we'll get to that bit in a minute.
I think that's it is worth emphasising what you said about it being a parasite.
Yeah.
Because depending on what we mean by parasite, I get it is.
Yeah.
But when people have a negative
that's true. When I say parasite, I mean
it doesn't.
When I say parasite, I mean like it's reliant on a host to survive and live and get its nutrients and everything it needs. Without the host, it will die.
But does that devalue its worth?
Well,
I think that's a problem with that word, because people associate it with the negative connotation of the bot fly.
I don't mind the word. I understand what you're saying. You could swap the word for whatever you like, but I'm saying
because of that negativity, it strips the essence of what you're getting to.
Okay, so let's not use that word. But does
I agree with you.
Does the reliance on a host reduce an organism's worth?
Well, this is the thing. It all comes down to this idea of like, when does life begin? When does it become a person? And before we kind of answer that, I want you to have a few more facts, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. We'll be quiet
so,
too early for us.
No, that's okay.
Do you want us to jump in when?
It's okay. We'll kind of see how things go. But yeah, like you say, there is that date has changed over the years as we've become better equipped to deal with premature babies. So now it's thought that some as early as like 20 weeks could survive outside. So that's something we need to consider, especially when performing late-term abortions. But most of them are done before 13 weeks. So even though the law is 24 weeks, most are before 13. So I know I'm throwing out a lot of things here, but the other thing is this idea of, can the fetus feel pain? So again, this is like very heavily contested, and there's a lot of different research. But one scientist believed that fetuses likely couldn't feel pain until 20 weeks. I'll get to why in a minute.
I don't like the word likely.
Yeah,
well, this is the thing. This is what we're getting to. So he was just like likely. But another guy called Dr. Fisk, who is a former president of the International Fetal Medical and Surgery Society, said neurological research has convinced him that pain is not possible at all before 24 weeks.
because of how the brain is developed. It doesn't have the cortex needed to kind of feel pain. Dr. Anand he was a professor of pediatrics, anesthesiology and neurobiology at the University of Tennessee's Health Science Center, long title, said he considered fetal pain to kind of only likely arise at 18 to 24 weeks. And when I say likely at this point, it's because different fetuses develop at different rates, especially around the kind of like 20-week mark. Like no fetus grows at the same rate as another, so some might develop it a week earlier than others. And then a 2005 paper for the Journal of the American Medical Association, written by a Dr. Rosen, said that fetal pain was unlikely before the third trimester at about 27 weeks. So even though some fetuses could potentially develop it as early as 18 weeks, most wouldn't until as late as 27 weeks. He says pain sensation required neural connections in the cortex of the brain, which only begins emerging around the 23rd week and is not functionally developed until the 26th or later. So, this said, there are a lot of cases where after about 20 weeks, if a woman has an abortion, she is given like anesthetic and pain medication, not for her but for the fetus.
Yeah.
And same if she has to have a late-term abortion for any reason.
So that essentially becomes, you know, you can feel to the fetus, the baby at that point, I would call it.
Yeah.
Correct me if you think I'm wrong, guys,
That's
but
okay.
I would call it a baby at that point.
Okay.
It's like saying, we know you can feel pain, we're going to stick a needle in you, or whatever it is, so that you don't feel pain, and then we're going to end your life.
Yeah. So...
That seems to be the way I see that.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, not a lot of abortions are carried out at this late stage, and most of them are only in emergency situations. So take Utah, for example. In 2014, only 17 abortions in the entire of the state were carried out after 20 weeks.
Is that for 1 year, is it? Or, okay,
yeah. So it's not a huge amount, but they're still obviously important and need to be counted, right?
Yeah. And the limits is where we should concern ourselves, because, you know, you were saying about 18 is where there's some sufficient cortex development
in some.
Some, I would argue that's where you've got to draw a line. You've got to draw it at the earliest point at which. And all of this is predicated on the assumption that well-being is something that we should base this on, rather than, as you said, when we survive out the womb, which to me is philosophical nonsense. That doesn't mean anything. Yeah. But for me, it's about that well-being aspect. I don't know if you two.
Well, pain is also a problematic measurement. I mean, basically, it's like you've referenced it as name the trait game. You know, name the trait that a fetus does not have, that if you did not have, I could be justified in killing you. And even if you say something like pain, there are people who have physical abnormalities where they do not feel pain. And such a person, would you justify killing them because they don't feel pain?
You mean they can experience psychological pain by threats. So even if their pain receptors isn't working,
not necessarily. So you could take a person who has that condition, which I'm sure you're both familiar with, where you don't feel physical pain. It's a very dangerous condition. It sounds amazing, but it's incredibly dangerous. But so you can envision a person who has that condition, where they do not feel that pain, and also are severely mentally handicapped. So they don't experience psychological pain much either. But the person's perfectly happy, they're cared for, they're living a life. Are you justified in stabbing that person to death? Ripping their organ from organ and causing their death?
It's like this brings in human rights, right? If there is such a thing.
Well,
if human rights exist, then you're actually getting at the definition of a human. Are those things necessary to be a human?
No, but look, how would you answer that question, both of you? I mean, would you justify ripping that person limb from limb?
For no reason.
Because you couldn't be bothered to take care of it.
Well, no, I wouldn't personally. No.
I don't think anyone has an abortion because they can't be bothered. Well, okay, maybe some, but I don't think the
perhaps
majority
that was flippant of me because you don't have the money to look after that person anymore.
Societies did this a long time ago. So if they gave birth to a child that was mentally deficient, physically disabled, throw them off a cliff.
But that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, is that moral?
I think
is it justifiable to kill that person?
I think it's I know it's going to be like weird to say, but I think if you couldn't properly look after a handicapped disabled adult like that, you could pass them on to a carer who would do that. But the economic burden of that is incredible. Like, so it costs a hell of a lot of the government to look after people like that. So if you can prevent someone having to go through that before they're alive, I think you do it.
But the question is because we can't determine when they are alive. What we're trying to consider, you can't say.
Here's another thing to think about, right? Okay, so most abortions happen under 13 weeks. So when the fetus is 11 weeks old, essentially, right, in the womb, that's when most abortions take place. Like under that, most of them are in the first few weeks. So like I'd say like 11 to 13 weeks. This is where I start to have like kind of weird kind of issues, because it looks like a little person, okay? It's got like little limbs, it has a little head, it's about this big, but inside that it doesn't have any kind of like brain waves or consciousness. It doesn't have a cortex. It doesn't really have like many like neurons or anything. It doesn't have any proper connections in it. But if it's a girl, it already has all her little eggs and ovaries in there. Yeah. So you're not just carrying a potential life, you're carrying the potential for potential life.
This kind of seems to go back to what he was saying, in the sense that you have all these different factors that constitute a human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you could say it has eggs. That means that you're not just killing one, you're potentially killing many.
Yeah.
I know that's not quite the case, or you could base it on when pain receptors can be found in the skin. It's about 8 weeks. It's not long at all. Yeah. Or when the cortex, when the spinal.
Yeah, that's the thing. That there are pain receptors, but it can't feel pain yet. It can't. Yeah.
So the spine 15 weeks, and then you've got the cortex 20. Yeah. And do you judge it on when it can breathe, when it can live outside?
Yeah.
When is it human?
So one of the things that... Sorry, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, because you were questioning well-being.
I was questioning pain rather than necessarily well-being. But
well, wouldn't you say they're necessarily related?
Yeah. Related, but not the same. But
not the same thing.
Sure thing.
Okay. I'd say that pain's one of the expressions of well-being.
Well, it's difficult to say, because, for instance, you could envision this severely disabled person having well-being even though they can't experience pain. Sure.
Okay.
So okay, we go off, but I could take it.
For me, I think it comes down to kind of like a very like case by case basis. Like, and I think this idea of like being human is, I'm going to be honest, I think it is a kind of subjective thing on some levels, especially when it comes to something you're carrying inside you. Because like, I think a lot of the meaning we give to like a fetus comes from the meaning that we as outsiders give it, if that makes sense. So when you look at like a little 11-week-old fetus, it's just developing vocal cords. So is it just a bundle of cells that can do something that are growing, or is it a potential little person who's one day going to be talking to you?
Well, it's certainly, but no matter what, I mean, from the moment of conception, it's a potential person, but that alone doesn't justify a hardline pro-life case. You can't say because it's potential life that it isn't, because then anything is potential life, you know.
Yeah.
It's that level.
Yeah, and that's why I think kind of like the emotional labels we attach to it do become really important. I think it's important that a baby is wanted for it to be born. I'm a big believer in like
quality. Have rights to be born, like
I'm a big believer in quality of life over quantity. I think it's better that a baby.
Who are you to decide that?
I would rather anyone be born into a happy, loving family with people who can care for them than born addicted to drugs, born with some form of disability.
Would you rather than be killed than that?
If it's before they can feel pain and know about it and have a consciousness, yes.
But what about
when it does?
Yeah, and what about my? This is why I really wanted to press you on my case of this severely disabled person. No difference. Can't feel pain. Doesn't know what's going on.
I think there's a difference if it doesn't have a consciousness yet.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Can you?
The consciousness is the capacity.
Okay, this disabled person's in a coma.
So born disabled.
Then euthanasia. I think that's fine.
But that person will awake from that coma in 9 months.
What, and they can't feel pain?
What? So you want them to awaken to a life that they're going to hate, where they can't enjoy anything, where they're not going to be
We've
loved.
got this severely disabled person, the same person we had before, that you said you'd feel tricky about killing. It was the simple case to just go and kill that person. That person is now in a coma from which they'll awake in 9 months. Yeah. Can you just go and kill that person?
I think it depends on what quality of life they're going to have after the coma.
Which is an argument for euthanasia, right?
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
If the quality of life's bad, I sort of.
I know it's controversial, but I am in favour of like assisted suicide and euthanasia.
No, I am. I had an unfortunate incident recently with some friends of mine. They had a child, and the child, unfortunately, during giving birth, got wrapped around the cord.
Oh, bless.
Suffocated to the point that it destroyed a significant amount of the brain.
Yeah. That nearly happened to me. I stopped breathing because it got.
I'm sorry to hear it. But
I just feel sorry for my mum. I didn't know about it.
The poor child ended up in a state where she will never have cognitive abilities.
Oh, bless her.
She was in a state where she was always going to be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And they gave the parents that one opportunity. Do you want us to end it now? And they said yes.
Yeah.
Got a lot of shit from a lot of people. I think they made the moral choice. I think they did the right thing because the quality of life for them, but more importantly the child, is in a bad state.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, that's a different thing to aborting a child that is going to have a good time based on the fact that you think it would be better for them not to be born into a world of drugs, etc.
Yeah.
I think,
I mean, like, say the mother's like addicted to heroin. I think sometimes it can be horrible for a baby to.
My mum, for example. I was born from my mum who's severe alcoholic, and I was born into an environment that was just terrible.
Yeah.
I wouldn't exist. I would have been killed according to your philosophy, because.
But did your mum want you?
No.
Okay.
So my mum didn't want me. She just didn't know how to go around the abortion situation, and I was born into an environment that was very bad. There was lots of drugs. Alcohol was specifically bad there, and there was other things. I'm not trying to make it personal.
Yeah, no, it's
I'm
okay.
just saying that I'm an example of something.
This is why.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying things can't come.
This is
like,
why.
This
is why. Look, let's not throw together a case where you've got a permanently damaged cognitive ability and being born into difficult economic and social environments. Completely two conversations. Let's separate them out, because if you're going to be born into poor socio-economic backgrounds, there's a good chance that you can still live a fulfilling life.
Because there are different arguments.
I think, even though these are examples of like cases, it's difficult to say without talking about individual cases. I think, there's a case where that can be great, but if your mother didn't want you and she was going to kill herself if she didn't get an abortion.
But it wasn't about the abortion.
Maybe.
Your socio-economic argument, or at least the points you were making, with just the fact that I was not really wanted. And
I'm not saying it would be. I'm not saying like I think abortion should be forced or I think abortion should be this or this. I'm just saying if it's what the mother wants and it's best for the baby, I don't see why we should deny it.
We have to be careful here, because when you say something like if the mother was going to commit suicide, then the abortion is okay. Well, not if that child's alive necessarily. Because if you're considering that child a life, then there's no difference between that child being in the womb and outside of it.
So it's better that two people die instead of one?
No, not necessarily. So if that child were outside of the womb, nobody would justify that mother killing the child to stop the mother from killing herself.
But as soon as it's outside of the womb,
but at this kind of early stage, if the child is suddenly out the womb, it's dead anyway.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. At what stage are we talking about?
We're talking about 20 weeks, I'd say.
Well, I was thinking in this case like the 13.
13, okay.
Yeah.
So pain receptors, but not spinal neural connections and no cortex.
Yeah. It's so no consciousness, can't feel pain.
Right. My position, my current conviction is that before there is a nervous system that is sufficient, and that's a question to be had.
Yeah.
I do not see it as a human life. I do not see it as a baby. I do not see a reason to call it as such. It's a potential human.
I think that's fair.
But once there's sufficient well-being, once there's sufficient experience in that extent, for the same reason I don't pay people to hurt mice or beef or whatever, I can't condone that, because it is a life at that point.
Why have you drawn the line there? What did you say was your criteria for human life?
For me,
consciousness and
not so. For me, it's well-being. It's one.
okay.
But how are you quantifying that? Like, what quality are you looking for in the child that needs to develop before it's a human?
So you've got pain receptors which develop. They're called receptors.
Okay, so it's reception to pain is what you're looking for.
Specifically the cortex aspect of it, because there's a difference between having pain receptors having the neural spinal connection which some things have, and the cortex itself. The cortex itself is which.
So it's the experience of pain then.
It's about the pain is where I seem to draw my line.
But if you're in a coma, you don't feel pain. But you've
already lived. You're an experience. You are.
Why should that matter? If your criteria for human life is whether or not it can experience pain, then if you can't experience pain,
life in general, it's criteria for life in the early stages. It's like your criteria for what makes someone a human to begin with. It's not to do with.
But why does it matter if you've already experienced some pain and then stopped, or if you've just never experienced that pain?
I think
why is it the case? Why is it the case that if somebody does not experience pain, and then continues not experiencing pain, that person is never a human? But if that person doesn't experience pain, then experiences a little bit of pain, then goes back to experiencing no pain, that person is all of a sudden a human.
I don't think it's just pain. I think it's a whole mix of things, like not being able to survive outside a womb, a lack of consciousness, and a lack of pain.
So it has to be all of those things together. So if it lacks one of those things, it's still a human.
Well, it's a case-by-case basis. Like it's hard to say.
Define a human.
Yeah.
According to, the basic taxonomy, or whatever phrase we might use.
Like where?
And a human would just fit a morphological description.
Where would you draw the line exactly? Like,
Well, I'm very comfortable with saying I can't draw that line.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is
you have to draw it somewhere, or else you either say that all abortions fine
actually,
and none at all.
that's the thing. You don't even have to ever make this decision. No offense, I don't want to play the gender card, but you're lucky that you never have to make this decision.
I'm certainly lucky, but I also don't see that as affecting my ability to reason on the issue.
But imagine you suddenly found yourself with a little parasitic bundle of cells inside you that you didn't want, and you knew that was going to grow, and that was going to change your body, and that was going to drain your resources, like your physical resources, and then you were going to have to look after this thing for the next 18 years, and it's going to change your life. It was going to change.
I think there's a word for that, No, if you're asking me what I would do if I became pregnant, I wouldn't want to enshrine this into law or even into public morality, but I mean, myself, I wouldn't be able to abort it.
At any point.
No, I obviously I can't speak until it actually happens. It's foolish of me to do so.
How about the fact that I've had to take the morning after pill? Have I committed some terrible bad thing because I've?
No, because I think that the view that the life begins at conception is as absurd as the view that life doesn't begin until it pops outside the womb.
Where are you drawing it? Because that implies that you have drawn it somewhere.
Well, no, the reason that's the thing, because I can't draw the line, I basically say from the earliest point possible myself. Because of the fact that I don't know, I would have to just treat it as though it were a potential human life and treat it as such. Because I can't draw that line, until I can draw that line, I would be incredibly uncomfortable trying to draw that line. And so myself, I would at effectively any point along that pregnancy that I was experiencing myself, I would have to say that I don't think I could bring myself to abort it. Simply because I can't draw that line. Are you?
I think
The day after.
Because you are drawing the line if you would accept that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because my natural instinct is to say yes, that's fine.
And the thing
So the line is being drawn somewhere, but look at where my line is being drawn. It's being drawn very, very, very early.
The problem is you're not taking into account specific emotions and specific circumstances, because emotions make us do crazy things. I can sit here and say, I think killing's wrong, I think this is wrong, I'd never hurt anyone, but imagine someone killed my dog. I would think twice about hurting
That's
them.
also why I don't like to make... I don't like in philosophical discussions, especially with abortion, to say, well, what if you were in that situation? Because
I don't think abortion is a philosophical discussion. I think it's a real life discussion. It affects real life. You can't talk about it in hypothetical. Yeah. Well, I don't think you can talk.
Why it can't be both. But what I'm saying is that.
But I don't think you can talk about it in hypotheticals and say, oh well, what if this and what if, because it's affecting real people every day.
So the what ifs is to find out where these limits are.
Yeah.
So I've said that it's well-being.
There's no other way to find out where those limits are. I think if I'm going to
be, you just don't know where.
I'm not. Have you heard of the paradox of the heap of sand?
No, go on.
If I put a grain of sand on the table, is it a heap of sand?
Oh, okay, this one, yeah.
A grain.
Yeah,
What about 2?
Don't know.
3?
Don't know.
4?
The idea is, when does it become a heap and stop being a
But
bundle
you see
of
how you
grains?
immediately start saying you don't know?
No. But the problem there is that what is the difference between the 5th grain of sand and the 500th?
With
They're all grains of sand.
Mm-hmm.
With
the
the baby,
difference is with the baby, there's different things that get
But
developed.
that's exactly the problem. That's exactly the problem. If you had a moral rule that said, I will not step on a heap of sand, I won't do it. Just imagine you had that moral rule.
Right, okay.
At what point would you avoid stepping on the sand? There's a good chance that once there's...
That's a different question to the first one you asked. So the problem I have with the grain of sand analogy is a grain of sand is the same as the next grain of sand. So you're saying at what point does it become...
And in the same way, I would say that the reason I can't see something like pain reception as the criteria for humanity is because of the fact that if a living human being now were to lack that, you'd still consider it a human. And so what I'm saying is that in the same sense that it's no particular grain of sand that causes it to become a heap, I don't think there can be a particular quality. I don't think there can be a particular quality that a human develops that makes it a human. It's a combination of all.
But
so you were saying
if you have a human who is technically brain dead because they have no brain activity and they can't move and they can't function without life support, you turn off the life support and let them die.
Perhaps, but that's not an easy moral decision, and you still consider it a human life, don't you?
Abortion's not an easy moral decision. No one goes into abortion thinking it's easy.
But do you consider it a human life? Because remember the discussion we're having
What's the difference between a fetus on the 3rd day and a human being who's lived for 20 years but happens to now be in a coma? Because they're not both grains of sand.
So what's the difference to you? Experience?
Well, one, you've got lots of experience, but two, the many sands of grains of sand, which aren't the same thing, you could call them grains of mud, grains of this and grains of that, it's a clump of cells at that point, right? The fetus. I don't know the ins and outs, maybe.
I mean, so
it's like a blastocyst.
Of course.
But I know what you mean.
But the expression of those clumps of cells in me, or in that person that's in a coma, is far different. There is levels of sentience, which is something I care about. There's level of self-sufficiency, which is something you've mentioned. There's other aspects in it.
But it's all of those aspects together that make something that's more than the sum of their parts.
The point I'm trying to say that I have a problem with your analogy is that the grain relies on each grain being the same. The expressions of the grains in the human body, the grains that build us up during our development.
The reason that I use that analogy, I see exactly what you're saying, but the reason I still use that analogy and still stand by it is because it illustrates my view that there is no particular trait. So they may as well come in any order and be the same. It's like, in the same way that you can't choose the particular grain of sand that causes heaphood, because they are all just the same. You cannot choose the particular trait that causes humanhood.
If all cells are equal, if all just make us human, do you have an issue with someone having a limb amputated? Do you have someone with an issue with someone having a bundle of cancer cells removed?
No, but in the same sense that if I had a moral rule not to step on a heap of sand, I would have no problems stepping on a single grain.
But they're the same thing. It's just a bundle
No, but
of
then
cells.
so this is what I'm saying. This is why I want to get this analogy. This is why I really want to get this analogy across to you. It's important.
What's the? I know what you're trying to say,
well,
but I still think you're wrong.
Let me try and finish this analogy. So, you have a moral rule: don't step on a heap of sand.
What does this represent?
That moral rule represents don't kill a human life. Okay.
That's not my moral rule.
But let's say that it is. For argument's sake, because again, look, the discussion that we're having now. Remember, we've got to separate this out. The discussion we're having at the moment is how do we define what is a human life? Of course, there are instances where you could say that is a human life, but should still be killed, such as in the cases of euthanasia. But we need to be careful to define what we mean by human life. So this is the discussion we need to have first. And so, on that discussion. Do not step on a heap of sand is a moral rule that is analogous to saying do not kill a human life. Now, I would be happy to step on a single grain of sand, and I would be happy to take the morning after pill. But I cannot decide at which point I would stop stepping on those clumps of sand, because I can't tell when they've become a heap. And in the same way, I'm incredibly uncomfortable deciding at what point that moral rule kicks in, that you can't kill it. It's now a human.
I think we're all uncomfortable on that.
Of course.
And I think the entire endeavour, if I'm wrong, is to find out when it becomes...
But the reason that I use that analogy is because it may be the case that we can't do that.
But we know.
I think
what aspects of development that we can verify certain aspects of development. We have far more advanced science than most would think.
Okay, but what you cannot prove, although you can scientifically prove stages of development, you can't prove scientifically that it is those stages of development that constitute personhood.
Okay, maybe you can't make 100% morally right or correct decision every time, but you can do what's best for the people involved, and sometimes that means making hard decisions. Sometimes that means making immoral decisions, but ultimately it might be better for the greater good for the greater number of people.
That would make it a moral choice.
Your position.
Well,
seems to be. Day 1, no problem. Take a pill. Day 2, no, can't do it now.
No.
That's where the grains are.
That's not what I'm saying. It's more like day 1, fine.
Right.
Day 2,
final day. No, God no. In between, I don't know.
So number 2 would be I don't know. So the default position is no, you can't do it. Surely, if there's any chance that that's a human being, you have to have the rule has to be completely to one side.
Not necessarily, because the chance doesn't. Just because saying you don't know doesn't mean that there's an equality of chance.
What's the default position when you say you don't know? Is the default position that no? Let me finish. Is the default position that this is not a life? You can end it until there's sufficient proof. The burden of proof is on the person to prove that it is a life, or is it the other way around, where you say until you have sufficient reason to show me that this is not a human, however we may define it. However we may look at this grain of sand, until that point, the default position has to be that you must allow it to live because it has human rights. Because I'm not comfortable letting you get away with this position that you're assuming. You are drawing the line.
I'd have to say that in that instance, and that is where you would have to make individual case-by-case discussions. The reason being because that's the thing. So saying you don't know doesn't mean that you're 50-50. So on the second day, I might say, well, I don't know. I'd say I don't know for sure on the first day. I genuinely don't know.
But you would take the pill.
Only because that don't know represents a 99 point something percent chance of that's not a life, and a tiny percent chance that it is.
That's a knowledge claim.
It's a claim. It's the probability of. I don't like the word probability. It's the level of conviction that I hold.
But you hold that. Nevertheless, that is a knowledge claim if you're making a statement of fact.
I'm not making a statement of fact. I'm making a claim of conviction.
So a statement of belief, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And your belief, whether or not it's substantiated,
my belief is
enough for you to kill a baby.
No. But that's the problem. So my belief on the first day is that. My belief on the first day would be erring on the side that it's fine, to do as you please. That's not a life. It's simply the more grains of sand that you add, the more that probability shifts towards the middle.
I understand.
And I'm afraid I simply can't name a day or a time. It's like let me ask you the same question, because obviously you don't share my view. So let me ask the question in terms of analogy. So let's say you had that rule not to step on the heap of sand. When would you stop stepping on the heap of sand?
I'll try not to, just period. If my rule was I don't want to stand on heaps of sand, I just would not. I'll do my best not to stand on heaps of sand, period.
Right,
I do think it's a bad analogy because it doesn't take into account like the specialization of cells and cells becoming organelles and cells becoming organs, organs becoming organ systems.
That point she's making is where I was saying the grains aren't the same.
And I see what you're saying, but I'm saying until you can show me which of those particular cells or traits is the thing that constitutes personhood, then
that's what we've been trying to say.
I don't think
it's
that
to
you
do
can
with
say
the
that
brain
it's
and
false.
developing consciousness. It's to do with pain receptors.
But that's the thing. I'm saying I don't find that convincing.
Okay.
I don't buy that for the reason that if you're taking that trait in isolation, then you could justify killing someone in a coma.
But you're not taking them in isolation. That's the thing. You're looking at the whole. So if I say to you, okay, we're going to remove a bundle of cells from you that doesn't have a consciousness, that can't feel pain, that it could grow, it could develop more, but at the minute it's looking like it's going to do more harm to your life than good. Would you be okay with me taking that from you?
Yes.
Yeah. That's what a fetus is to some people.
Of course, and it is to me at many stages.
And
but
it's no different than a cancer cell, no different than
if you were taking
a dodgy
out,
leg.
if that piece of me, if that piece of me were on the road to becoming a human life and I wasn't sure at what stage along the path it was, then I don't know if I could justify that.
But that's
It's
the thing, though.
It's a completely different situation.
But you do know what stage it's at.
Well, I know what stage that is at, which is stage 0 and never will progress.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
and so that's fine.
You can do an ultrasound to see where the baby's at or where the fetus is at.
Right, but you can't scan for humanhood.
You can if you define the parameters.
But
you just need to understand human biology.
You can't just define personhood and roll with it.
We do it already.
Yeah.
How do you think we define a human?
But we shouldn't do.
So you're saying there should be no definitions of basically anything?
No,
because ultimately it does fall into this area of agreement to a large extent when it comes to the way in which we describe them.
But you know, in the same way that you just asked me, well, is your belief really enough to justify killing a human being? And I was like, actually, you know, I think you're right, it's not. In the same sense, is your belief or your consensus on what constitutes personhood really enough to justify the chance of possibly killing a human? Because I don't think that is either.
I think it's very different when it's your own body, though.
Okay, should we try this another way?
I want to just quickly answer this question. Then
go ahead.
Yeah, of course.
To bring up.
Yeah.
Could you repeat the question for me?
So, you said that the definite... Well, to make this question clearer, there's something I just want to try. Can you define human being?
You won't necessarily accept my definition.
But that's why I'm interested.
Okay, so for the intent of this conversation, my current knowledge, let's say no.
Okay,
let's say that I know there's a human.
Okay, so if you can't define human...
I can give you some definitions, but they're not going to be very satisfying.
If you can't define human, and you've also recognised that the quality of personhood, of being a human, is incredibly important to the abortion debate, then how can you have an opinion on the abortion debate if you can't define humanhood?
Because, remember, I'm for the vegan philosophy, right? The vegan philosophy doesn't really give a special get-out-of-jail-free card to humans. It falls down into the purview of well-being, something that can be objectively tracked. As soon as something has a cortex, especially a prefrontal cortex, that is where I say, I won't eat that meat, that animal.
So for you...
So, for me...
For you, the question isn't, is it a human? It's can it feel pain?
For me, it is about pain. I don't give a shit, to be blunt, whether it's a human. I care whether or not it feels pain.
Okay, so what if you were giving birth to a grasshopper?
Right.
Would it be moral to abort the grasshopper?
So you'd have to measure the level of sentience.
Would it have the same level of moral weight?
I would ask the same questions of what we were asking of a baby. Does it have a cortex?
Yeah.
Does it have pain receptors? To what level is its sentience?
If you had worms, if you had worms, would you feel bad about taking medication for them?
Taking medication as in to get rid of worms.
That form of parasite does lead towards that negative.
Oh God!
You see what I mean?
I was just trying to think, where's the closest he could get to giving birth to a grasshopper?
Well,
I didn't mean it like that.
I thought not. I just thought caveat that point.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I wouldn't have a problem with taking that medication, but that's because I'm not defining this on the basis of pain. I'm defining it on the basis of personhood. It's you, Stephen, who's defining it on the basis of pain. So really, that question should be aimed to you. Would you have a problem with taking medication for the worms if they are sentient and can feel pain?
You can make separate arguments to what you were referring to about my health, whether or not my well-being does actually constitute more than the worms. Worms also have a really rudimentary nervous system.
Okay, but what if it were the case that if you were to leave those worms and not take the medication, they would grow into beings more sentient and more capable of feeling pain than you are now?
I don't care about their potential.
Okay.
I care about their stance.
Good. So you'd have no problem taking that medication.
In that extent, I as I currently stand, I don't mind.
Okay, fine. Yeah, and neither would I. So that's just to answer your analogy. I would say there's no problem.
What basic? Maybe you should move on, but
that's okay.
I'm confused because there has to be some kind of element that you are tethering your position to.
Well, this is the thing.
In order to say that on day one you will abort with no problems, but then somewhere else you would change your mind, you have to understand that logically means there is something. You might not be able to name it, and that's fine. Yeah. But there is something there.
No, you're right. You are right. But
I do feel like you're kind of at the position of where you're like, I don't know where human life begins, so we better let it live just in case until someone can prove otherwise to me.
That's not day one. That's my problem.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's more like it's not a separate human life until you can prove it is, with, you know, consciousness and so on.
But just consider for a moment if you're wrong there. Just think about if that's wrong.
Which is why my default position is that you can't kill it until you have sufficient reason.
Think about
I agree with that
happening.
too, but yeah.
And because of and I agree with you there, and because of the fact that I cannot provide sufficient reason that a fetus at any particular part along the process, say 13 weeks, 14 weeks, I cannot provide sufficient reason to show that that is not a human life. And so based on your criteria there, I wouldn't be able to abort it.
But I feel I can.
As well,
so if I...
So what's your... If you just said a moment ago, agreed with Stephen, that you would have to prove that that's not a human life.
Yeah.
So how would you go about proving it's not a human life?
I'm not saying like... I think up to a certain point, like I say, until it can survive outside the host's body or the mother's body, until it has a consciousness of its own, until it has like pain receptors of its own, until its brain has reached a certain stage of development and so on, it is a bunch of cells relying on the mother.
Does it have to be all of those things, or can it just be one of those things makes it a person?
I think all.
Every single one?
On the whole,
so if the baby had every single one of those things,
I think
except one?
I think there are some exceptions, but on the whole...
When a baby's born, it requires almost just as much as the attention from the mum as it does when it's inside, because it dies immediately. It's not self-sufficient.
That's true.
I'm just curious.
At a certain point, like it's things like its lungs can't inflate and deflate by themselves. It can't breathe by itself. That kind of thing.
It can't. But basically, the reason that that's a problem is because the baby would die were it not for the mother. But that's exactly the same when it's outside of the womb.
No, the baby would die if not for the umbilical cord.
But the umbilical cord is
the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord would be worth nothing if the mother was dead.
So the difference is that the mother has to consciously provide sustenance when the baby is out of the womb.
Yeah.
But while the baby's inside, it's unconscious and it's done without her permission, actually.
Yeah.
But it's done with permission outwards.
I think if a woman accepts the pregnancy and chooses to carry on with the pregnancy to full term, then it's with permission and consent.
I think I do have a really big... We've got on...
I have a huge problem with that.
Well, we've got two things here that are really important. So you've got this definition of human, which you both are driving at. And then I'm almost having my own conversation, right? I don't give a crap. I care about well-being, right? And so I'm going to do my best not to confuse.
But do you not see why that might be a flawed way to determine the ethic of abortions?
I am kind of conscious of time, and there is something else quite big I want to bring up, if that's okay.
That's fine.
And that's to have a look at kind of like the effect of abortion on the UK as a whole.
Sure thing.
So my statistics are a little bit old now because the most detailed ones I could get were from 2013.
Okay.
Like for all these things that I want to talk about. But I'm going to throw out some numbers at you, and there could be quite a lot, and then I want to kind of like discuss this. So in I'm kind of rounding up my numbers here because they're quite big, but they are very specific, and I have all the references as well.
I imagine you'll link the
everything's going to be in the description below. So throughout the year in England and Wales alone, there were 185,000 abortions in total. It's estimated that they cost the NHS about £120 million. A lot of people have issues with taxpayer money going towards that. However, in that same year, where are we? There were nearly 70 million children in care at any one time, right? I know you're not going to like this, but let me go with this, all right?
No, it's fine. I think I see where you're going.
Yeah. If you look at the cost of every child in care, and you look at the cost of, like, you know, fostering kids in residential care and so on, the care system is already, like, stretched to hell. And it's thought that there's like, literally, like, 150,000 vulnerable kids who aren't getting the help they need. Just completely hypothetically, like, I know I said I didn't like them, but if we are going to use a hypothetical, let's imagine that all those unwanted babies were born and put into the care system. That would put an extra burden of a minimum of £10 billion on the UK.
Okay, do you think the reason that people who are pro-life are against taxpayer money going to abortions is because of the amount of money it costs? Yeah. Do you think that's why they oppose taxpayer money going towards abortions?
No, I don't think it's the amount.
It's
I think it's the fact that it's going to the abortions. Yeah, but I'm saying, but that's not the argument here. The fact I'm saying is that abortions cost us 120 million. If we put all those kids in care because they're not wanted, it would cost us at least 10 million.
You know what else would save the NHS a lot of money? Is when somebody has a terminal illness, killing them immediately.
Yeah. Can I just, to add to what you were saying, if, for example, you're having a conversation with me and we can show that there's sentience, and somebody was saying, I know you're not saying this, but somebody was saying, we can abort at that time, and I say, why? And I'm concerned about the well-being. Or someone else might be concerned about it fitting the definition of a human, or whatever it might be. And your answer is a consequentialist economic one. It's a non sequitur to me, because I'm concerned about the life.
Do you not care about the fact that 180,000 kids could have gone into care?
No.
Well, I care about the fact that however many kids it was could have gone into life as well.
Yeah.
But overpopulation already.
I do.
It would just be a drain.
But you could say the same thing. Overpopulation isn't justification for killing old people.
Would you? So I guess it comes into.
So it shouldn't be justification for killing young people either.
Would you like to live in a world where, when you were born, the roll of the dice, the vagina you fell out of, to put it like crudely, could have been the case that you came from someone in poverty and you were just dispensed with?
Well, my family didn't have a lot of money.
Yeah. So are you saying that
the only reason I'm still here is because my mum didn't believe in abortion.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, from a very personal perspective, if it was a choice between me having a kid now, when I'm not economically stable, when I couldn't devote time and care to it, and me having a kid in 5-10 years' time, when hopefully I will be economically stable and I can give time and care to it, I would rather do it then.
Okay.
And I don't see why I should be denied the right to abort a fetus now, just in case an accident happens.
Let me answer why I think that, for me, the question has nothing to do with anything of what you've just said, but is purely whether or not it's a human being. The reason for that is because if it's a human being, it's no different between being in the womb and being outside of the womb.
That's
and therefore,
discounting the lives of everyone else involved.
It's not, because look, let me put the exact same question to you. If let's say that we decide that this fetus is alive, let's say that that's the case. There's no difference between that being inside the womb and outside the womb. The only difference is dependency on the mother. Degree of dependency, because it's still dependent. So let's say the baby is outside of the womb and the mother decides that it's too much of an emotional burden to know that that child is alive. Can that mother kill the baby?
Well, no, that's why we have the care system. But then that's an emotional strain on society, and
what if the mother would have? What if the mother's emotional strain?
It would have been better to get rid of the kid early before it had consciousness. This is what I'm saying.
What if the emotional?
I don't think they're comparable.
What if the emotional stress?
They're not comparable.
What if the emotional stress is knowing that that child is alive?
Then she should have been allowed an abortion earlier.
But what if she didn't know that that stress would come about? She thought it would be fine. She had the baby. Turns out it's far more stressful than she thought.
Then the kid goes into care and she gets treatment and help. It's a sad, horrible place.
But if you're going to say that, because that's fair enough. But it almost sounds a bit harsh. It almost sounds a bit harsh to say, well then, I'm sorry, the kid just has to stay alive and go into care, and you're just going to have to get help. But surely you could say the same and say, well, I'm sorry, you're just going to have the kid, and then you go and get help. And I'm not saying that's my view. I'm just saying if you're going to take the logic to its conclusion, that's the way I see it.
I don't think you can compare like a bundle of cells in the womb to an already born child. This is what I'm saying. You can't compare them.
What if he's comparing that middle stage?
But that's what I'm saying.
What if he's comparing 25 weeks where there's a cortex?
Well, then it gets more complicated.
Yeah.
And then.
Do you see what I'm? Do you see why then?
Tell me if I'm getting your position wrong, because if you take the fact that it has whatever you want to define a human to be at 25 weeks, and it also has all of those factors. 25 weeks after it's born. I think the point you were trying to make, and you tell me if I'm incorrect, is that whether or not it's inside the womb or not has no logical bearing.
Let me elucidate what I'm saying, because you're right. That's the point that I've made, but that's not necessarily the exact point I was making here, because you were talking about the economic benefit, and I completely agree with you with what you just said. That bundle of cells, if that's a non-life, then absolutely there is no reason why a woman should be forced to take that to term for the sake of economic.
I'm still talking about this like early stage abortion.
Okay.
I'm not comparing like a baby just born.
But what I'm saying is, if we decide that that is a human life, then everything changes. All of a sudden, you can't just say that because of economic burden, it needs to be aborted. As soon as we decide that that's a human life.
No, but I'm saying because of the potential economic burden, that's why abortion should be available.
Yes, so long as that fetus is not a human life. And that's why I'm saying it's absolutely crucial that we determine what we mean by human life, because it changes everything.
And that's why there's so much research done.
I must ask you, how do you define a human? What's a human life?
I can't do it, Stephen. I can't.
Okay, so you can't define a human. Is a chimp a human?
Okay.
Being, semi-facetious here, but there is...
No, you're making a great point.
And okay, let's say that you can't define a human. It's just
can I phrase it slightly differently? I can't define what it is that begins personhood.
Okay.
If I could, then this abortion debate would be over in a moment.
So you can be a human without personhood. That's what you may say.
Well, I'm kind of using personhood and humanhood interchangeably there. When I say you're a person, I mean you're a human for this conversation, this context.
Would my objection still stand to that? Does a chimp qualify for personhood?
No.
Why? Love philosophy.
I really hate it.
I don't know.
You don't know.
But here's the thing. So for the same
so
reason.
We don't need it, okay.
So can I ask you why you would say a chimp is not a human?
I don't care if it's a human. I care about well-being.
Okay, right. But let just for the sake, because this will help me make my point. Could you do that if I asked you to? Independent of the abortion argument, can you tell me what it is that differentiates a human and a chimp?
What biologically speaking?
Sure. Or what gives the human humanhood, whatever that means to you.
So the humanhood is more of a deeper question, right, about what it means to be human.
Yeah, and that's what I'm going for.
Whereas you could say a human is, and you could go towards our biological.
But give me the first. Give me the humanhood.
I don't need to.
Right, but if I asked you to, and I know that's irrelevant to what you're saying, but just
I think
could you do it?
Just how important that aspect is with my philosophy on this, that it doesn't matter.
No, I know, and that's why I'm asking you this independently of the abortion question, because I know this doesn't matter to you, but because it does to me.
Right.
Would you feel it fair for me to say that that's something that is almost impossible to do? It's you cannot just define that point of transition.
Saying that it's almost impossible to pinpoint where it is. Is not the same as saying that we know nothing about where it is.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So,
but you can't pinpoint that moment.
No.
So in the exact same way, in precisely the same way, and this is why I still want you to answer this question, I cannot pinpoint the point that the clump of cells turns into a human being. That doesn't mean that we can't know something about the difference, and that's why at day 1 I can say that it's okay, and at day 20 and at week 25 I can say that it's not.
I'm so close to the main point I'm trying to get across to you here. Is I appreciate what you're saying with not knowing where the line is and not knowing how and which to define it. The default position, in my opinion, tell me if it's wrong, therefore, is that you cannot kill it until you can justify where it is not whatever you define a human to be. You seem to agree with that.
Okay, can I say that I...
Because you follow it from the last day of it being in the womb to the second day.
Okay.
And you don't on the first.
So remember how a moment ago when I said that I myself would not be able to abort that child, but I wouldn't want to enshrine that into law or public morality.
Okay.
So when you ask me, does that mean that your default position is that you should not abort that child? Yes. But I wouldn't wish to impose that morality upon society until I can prove that with anything other than my emotional...
So for you the default position is you can do what you want?
My emotional state is not the thing on which to base law and public morality.
If you had to establish this law, though, where's the default?
The thing is, let's bring this back to reality for a minute. It's like, you keep saying, I don't know this, I don't know this. No offence, it's because you haven't studied it. Like, there are people out there who have devoted their lives to studying fetuses
I don't think that's necessarily true, because they study biology, but you can't study personhood.
Okay, no. There are people out there who literally will study the stages of being a fetus, and they, no offense, but they study abortions. They study when it's okay to have an abortion and when it's not. They devote their lives to this stuff. They study the development of fetuses. They study like all the minute details of when the brain develops, when it doesn't. They study the pain. They study this. They study the effects of abortions on women, on this, and they're the ones who lawmakers come to help them out. So we should respect the law in that.
I would still say that those people are not necessarily closer to knowing what personhood is.
But no offense, but they're closer to knowing it than any of us are.
Well, perhaps, but in the same sense, for instance, there are people who have spent years devoting their life to things like moral philosophy, for instance. Yeah. Are they any closer to knowing whether or not objective morality exists than we are? I don't think you can say that. I think
very different
when you're
biology.
But that's the thing. I'm not talking about biology.
I am. When it comes to deciding about people and lives and when humanity began, yes, it comes down to biology.
I don't think personhood is solely in the realm of biology. I think that you have to philosophize about what it means to be human.
I think everything comes back to
and
biology.
I don't think that an evolutionary biologist has any better idea of what it means to be a human, and when you can define something as beginning as a human than I do.
No,
I don't think you can say that.
The point that you're making about there's people that really studied this and they have the scientific facts on when the cortex develops or whatever it might be, that is scientific based, it's scientific questions, and they know way more than, say, Alex on this topic or myself. But Alex's question is not when does the well-being develop, it's more about why should that be the criteria in the first place. And
that's a philosophical question.
That has to be a philosophical question. Because otherwise you could say...
I still keep finding philosophy this, like, to be fluff. Like, there's no, like, actual basis for it.
Okay, so maybe this. Why do you agree where the line should be? Assuming, would you say 20 weeks, or where would you say you put a line?
I'm not sure I have, like, a definite line in mind at the minute, because, like, I'm still learning this stuff. Yeah.
Where do you draw it at the moment?
At the minute, I like the idea of about 13 weeks.
Okay, so...
Like, but I'm willing to change.
So 13, yeah? Yeah. Why 13?
As I've said, because of where the baby, where the fetus is in development. Like, but no brain, no consciousness, so on.
Pushing you further, but why do you care about the consciousness? Why do you care about those elements that you've just referenced? Because that's the philosophical question.
Because the consciousness is what we're aware of.
But why does that matter? Is the question.
Why does it matter?
Why does that matter?
Your emphasis on that, if we agree that is the criteria of what makes a human, it becomes a scientific question. And that we have the answers to the largest extent because the research has been done and we're fortunate enough to have our hands really on this. But what we're finding is that we and others don't agree on that philosophical structure to begin with. We don't have that assumption.
Even those experts don't agree with each other.
Of course. And so that's where we realised that you, in essence, define a human as those traits which developed during that time. I define not a human, but just anything that should be considered with rights, which is sentience, at a certain time. And then I can, once I've made that philosophical position and someone accepts that philosophical position, there's science to show where that starts. Whereas you have some definition for human, you have some definition from where this starts, you just don't know what it is. And that's fine.
Well, I don't have that definition, I know that there is a difference.
Yeah.
I know there is a difference. Like, my view on abortion can be summed up in one fairly simple and concise phrase, which is that the view that life begins at conception is as absurd as the view that it doesn't begin until it is released from the womb.
How can you say that?
How do you mean?
How can you say that statement without referring to knowledge or defining a human to begin with?
Because I know that the grain of sand is different from the heap, even when I can't say when one becomes the other.
I think you're arbitrarily defining the heap. Just because it's two cells, what the hell does that matter? It's not two cells that make something a human. You wouldn't say just two cells.
But it's not two grains of sand that make a heap.
But it could be if you define it that way.
It could be if you define life that way.
What if you define life?
Yeah, but you wouldn't, would you? And you wouldn't define two grains of sand as a heap.
No, but you have some form of definition of where you do define those several, how many heaps it might be, or how many grains.
But do you recognise that I can say that a grain of sand is not a heap and say that a heap of sand is a heap without having a precise definition of when that grain becomes the heap? Just because I recognise a difference doesn't mean that I know where that crossover happens.
Very different.
Or even that there is a place where that crossover happens.
It's a very different analogy to cells in a baby, though. I think it more like, a grain of rice in a burrito. when does it become a burrito? Because burritos have different ingredients.
That's another fine question, actually. In fact, that's probably a better analogy. But in the same sense, I couldn't tell you. I really couldn't.
You know the grain of salt that you're saying?
Yeah.
Why have you decided that day 1 represents 1 grain and that day 2 represents 2 grains? Why isn't grain 1 when it's still in the man's penis, when it's still in the woman's?
Well, that's you can.
Yeah. So the fact that you're okay with abortion on day 1 means you do actually have.
No, but look, you can do that if you want, but you could put that first grain of sand at the beginning of the universe because of the fact that I see that one zygote, that fertilized egg, as no different from the sperm cell. Both of those are not human life to me. So you could put the grain of sand wherever you want. Just
to say they're not human life means that you do have a definite.
If you put it this way, if you put the grain of sand as the sperm cell instead of the zygote, then the zygote is the 2 grains of sand. But those 2 grains of sand are still not the heap. You can start it wherever you like.
It seems to me when it comes to the grains of sand, which we should probably kill so you can move forward.
That's okay.
Careful with your words there.
Yeah, exactly.
I am conscious of time and think we should wrap up soon.
No,
that's okay.
You go ahead. You push us.
Are you sure?
Absolutely, go for it.
Okay. Well, I was going to end by asking you some kind of like, sort of like socially questions to be like, what do you think of this? But I'm kind of worried you're going to get like.
Well, we could try it quick fire if you like. I mean, if you want,
sure?
you can have the veto. So
you can go. You've
okay.
got 10 seconds to
give us a hand.
This one's less about kind of like the deep stuff in the philosophy and more about just like what do your instincts say about these like situations.
Some fun quick fire abortion. Hot topics.
Quick fire abortions. What? No, it's just I don't know. I thought they were kind of like interesting questions related to the whole topic of abortion, and I care more about your opinion on what's right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So let's imagine a woman takes all the kind of like precautions. She's on the pill, or using some other birth control, she's using condoms, but something happens. The condom rips, the pill fails, it happens, and she accidentally gets pregnant and wants an abortion. Is that somehow worse than if a woman is raped and gets pregnant and wants an abortion?
It's only different. So it depends on whether or not it's human life. And if it is human life, if it's not human life, if it's not human life, makes no difference because there's no human life. You can do what you like with it. If it is human life, then the question is exactly the same. To me, you might disagree with this, but if you want my answer, then the question is exactly the same as if that child was outside of the womb. Is the mother any more justified in killing that child if she was raped to have the child, or if she had it by accident, or however you like? Is there more of a justification? Perhaps there is more of a justification, but whatever that justification difference is, it's the same as if that child was outside of the womb.
I agree with Alex, but I think
but only if it's
your emphasis on the woman's feelings, obviously a difference for the woman carrying to term someone that raped her, basically their baby. Obviously, there's a factor in that as well. But as far as the baby or the fetus, I agree with what Alex said, with a few caveats. But
no difference.
And is the answer to one horrible, unspeakable act another horrible, unspeakable act? Which, if it is human life, killing a child is. Is that the answer?
The other thing is
okay,
like
so this is like really weird because when you said horrible, unspeakable act, I thought, being made to like carry your rapist child.
That's what I was talking about.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant like.
So I said that's what I was saying. If one horrible, unspeakable act like that.
Yeah, but then when you said eye for an eye, I thought you meant killing. So I was like, oh, you mean killing the kid? Like, is that the unspeakable act?
So I'm saying, is that?
Like what? Well, I guess
they are two. They are two. If that is a human life, then killing it is a horrible, unspeakable act.
Yeah.
And so,
arguably worse.
Can you commit that horrible, unspeakable act because you've been the victim of another horrible, unspeakable act? I don't know the answer to that question.
I would say absolutely not. I think there is not an answer to your thing, but I was just going to say that this is what's wrong with Adam and Eve and the concepts of this kind of nonsense. And
that's what's wrong with Adam.
Someone else inherits. The
sin, yes.
The sin
someone else inherits the guilt.
So the father rapes the woman. That is a sin. The father stands up bad.
Should the child be punished for the
child should not be punished. That's horrific.
Is it worse that the child is never born, or that the child grows up feeling like it's the child of a monster who was never wanted?
If it's life,
and the child is has sort of passed on guilt from the father, if that makes sense.
If it's life, then I don't think it should be terminated for the sake of avoiding that.
Really? Because again, this is where I think...
Put it this way, I would rather be alive and be the son of a rapist than be dead.
See, I am big on the whole like quality over quantity thing. Like,
but I don't. But I would, even if I agree with you there, I think that the quality of being alive outweighs the quality of being the son of a rapist. Now, obviously, I cannot say that with any certainty. But if we're speaking in hypothetical and we have to, then that would be my
But I
punch.
think it is subjective. It's a very subjective topic.
But because it's subjective, where's your default position? Because you were saying, you were voicing concerns about it, and you were saying, no, I'd prefer still to be born.
But I don't want, just to be clear, I don't want people to think that I pretending like I know at all what that must be like. I have no idea. But I'm speaking in terms of my hunches.
For me, the default is that the woman knows what's best for her and her body.
But does she know what's best for what's in her body?
Yes. I think a woman knows what's best for her potential kids.
The thing is, if that is a human life, it's like saying, I beat up a dog in my back garden. It's my garden. It's my choice.
Oh no, I disagree entirely.
Why? What's the difference there?
Okay, because if you beat up a dog in your garden, you're not doing it for any reason other than to beat up a dog,
I'm doing
right?
it because I enjoy it. Because I can't afford to keep that dog. I can't afford to keep that dog. I need to beat it to death.
You don't need to beat it to
death.
Okay,
I strangle it then. I stab it. I kill it quickly.
This is assuming you can't just get it out of your garden.
Yeah, no, you don't do that. You'd give it away if it's already alive. If it's ill, you could potentially euthanize it. I don't agree with it, and I wouldn't do that.
If you have a living being inside of you, you can give birth to it and then give it up for adoption too.
Yeah, and that's so much worse for the kid's well-being.
What if it's worse for the dog's well-being? If I'm going to give it to some shelter where it's not going to be adopted and live in a cage for the rest of its life, why not just kill it? It's my garden. It's my choice.
Some places do kill it, but there's a difference between like beating it and killing it and like euthanizing nicely.
Okay, well let's just say that let's say that I do it in the same way that a child is aborted. I rip its legs apart.
A child isn't aborted by like ripping its legs apart.
If it's a late enough abortion, that's
okay.
Would be basically put to sleep.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I'll do that first then, and then I'll rip it apart.
You know how an abortion works, right? Like, and those late-stage abortions like rarely happen. Like, and they're only in like extreme cases where the kid is already like injured or dead or whatever.
I will kill that dog in whichever way that pregnancy is terminated, whether that be by injection, by suction, whichever stage you're talking about.
You take a pill and your womb lining falls out.
I give the dog a pill and it disappears from existence. Can I do that?
Well, I wouldn't advise it, but...
But why not? That's the thing.
What do you mean?
Why would you not advise that?
Well... Like, it's already alive. It's got the consciousness.
But that's what I'm saying. That's why it's so important. If it's already alive, like you say... Because because it's already alive, you can't do that. And so that's why I'm saying it's absolutely crucial that we know when the life begins.
It's really interesting to see that our values are fundamentally defining the way in which we're approaching this conversation.
Absolutely.
That's true.
And I think that's really interesting.
But Stephen, I think even if I agreed with your objective morality about well-being and the importance of it, I still don't think that would render me in agreement with you here.
Really?
Because although I agree that even if I agreed that well-being is a good criterion for well-being, for morality, I don't necessarily think it's a good criteria for humanhood. But we've just kind of like gone off the rails a bit, which I think makes for a good conversation.
It's a different conversation from what I expected.
I've also been coming out with different opinions from what I expected. Like, Jesus Christ,
it's been.
I'm very surprised at some of the.
All three of these conversations have been a surprise to me in a good way. Like,
I'm worried I sound like a bitch.
What in this one?
In all of them.
Why?
What?
I don't know. I don't want to sound like
Trust me.
Yeah, kill all the babies.
Listen, if anybody's going to get called a bitch for this conversation, it's going to be me. You believe me? Oh God, yeah. Like, you kidding me? How many of your viewers do you think, or my viewers, or Stephen's viewers? Maybe. Well, I can't speak for Stephen's viewers, but how many of my viewers do you think are pro-life? I mean, really. You know, I can't see this ending particularly well. But
gonna warn you, I have like 80% female viewers now that are all like young women in their 20s, so they're gonna be like, you don't have a right over my body.
No, I have a right over what's in it.
If I could just make a point sure. To echo something I actually just said, but it's been really interesting to see how we've approached this topic. And for people
it's
who
a tough
are
one.
female, the mothers, they may feel that me and you have completely neglected their experience in this, and we've brushed it aside. And that's true to the extent because me and you are having more of a conversation about the life itself, and when it ascertains rights, when it has a position where it does not matter about those circumstances, whereas you have consistently brought in an angle of, well, you have to have these considerations, and you've brought in economic considerations.
I do think it's difficult because, like, as I said before, I don't want to play the gender card, but I think it's very different when you're considering these hypotheticals about your own body.
Or do you think that perhaps being emotionally attached to a situation puts you in a worse position to put yourself rationally? In any other issue, you would say that if you have an emotional investment, you're not in the best position to reason on it. The best thing you can do in most philosophical cases is to remove yourself.
That's the thing. That's why I don't think this is like a purely philosophical case. Like, and this is just me, and I do think emotions play a huge part in any woman's decision to continue a pregnancy or have an abortion, and that's why I don't think you can discount emotions.
And interestingly,
I wish
we had more time, because the way that you've said that, it's like, well, I don't think you can necessarily discount the opinion of the man. If you're gonna take into account the opinion of the woman, then one of the opinion of the man. And I wish we had more time to explore that, because I think that there's different weight to that.
I think when two people are involved in creating a baby, both of them deserve a say in that. I do agree with that, but I also kind of also understand that a mother's opinion is slightly
something
more.
We can discuss another time.
I'd
also want, while we're doing some qualifying here, I'd like to qualify that for this whole conversation, my view has very much been, I don't know how many times I've said I don't know this in this situation, but really this has just been a case of me throwing out food for thought. I can't say that I have a strong opinion on this. Like you say, Stephen, if you have to make a default rule, then perhaps I do have a default rule. But as far as making a philosophical case, I don't think I'm in a position to dictate public morality or law. I have to say that at the end of this conversation, I still don't think that I've come to a conclusion myself, but I'm also unconvinced by the arguments that both of you have put forward, myself. And I hope I've explained sufficiently why they don't quite do it for me.
I think the only thing I find dissatisfying about that, it might be just my own problem here with interpretation or whatnot, is that you haven't expressed nearly sufficiently what criteria you are basing this on, because the fact that you would abort it on day one but not afterwards means that there is something, it's not been expressed.
Yeah, but
the fact that you say you don't know isn't good enough to justify that you've got a definitive position on that point.
But I have as definitive a position on that as I do about the grain of sand in the heap. But
you've decided
I have as much certainty that a grain of rice is not a burrito, but that a full burrito is a burrito, even though I couldn't tell you when one becomes the other.
But you are telling me that there is some element of change between day one and day two.
I suppose, but that wouldn't necessarily be a change that brings about burritohood. And I don't necessarily think there is a single point at which that happens. I think it's a culmination. And I think it's the same thing with personhood. And that's why I can't put my finger on it. And even if it were possible to do so, we wouldn't be able to... It would be incredibly difficult to find, even if it were possible, which I don't think it is.
Okay, so Rachel's position is that... About 13 weeks, did you say, is where you're most comfortable?
Potentially, but
with special circumstances going
forward. I think it's a case-by-case basis. This conversation definitely took, like, a different sort of twist to what I expected, because, like, for me, I talk about abortion, and, like, it's not a philosophical issue of, like, when life becomes life. I think that is important, and I think you two have definitely opened my eyes to some things I didn't, like, think about in detail before, and I appreciate that, like, a lot. And as much as I'm like, philosophy's a fluff, I don't really mean that. You know what I mean?
It's fine, it's only my livelihood and degree.
I do actually understand what you're saying there, because philosophy can, at certain times, when someone's playing devil's advocate for the sake of playing devil's advocate, that's where it gets fluffy. But
sometimes I just get a little bit frustrated because, like, it's just the kind of person I am. I like to talk about the kind of, like, real life consequences of things, and I like to talk about the people, how it makes people feel. I like to talk about how it affects real people's lives and things like that. And like,
the only thing I would say in response to that is that I'd be happy to discuss those things, but I couldn't possibly tell you how important. So you could talk about, for instance, the economic impact, and you could tell me the numbers, but I cannot tell you what those numbers say about the ethics of killing an unborn child unless I have the philosophical framework in which to do so. I mean, you could tell me that by aborting a child, that by setting the limit at 23 weeks, you would save billions of pounds. Even on that, if you gave me that number, I still could not tell you if that's moral until I have the philosophical framework.
Talk about how it makes you feel for once. Like, do you not just get a feeling that something is good or bad?
And that's what I did. That's what I did when Stephen asked me what I would do personally, or when you asked me what I would do personally. I think that's what I did. But the reason I brushed over that quickly is because I don't think that is. I don't think that that's a way that I should be making my moral decision making. I don't think I should be doing it based on emotion. Now, you might think that that's fine, but it's just something that I'm not
can work for you. But I think when we are talking
doing.
about an issue like abortion, that is how people have to make their decisions. It is emotionally charged. They do have to think about these things. They can't be completely informed on the philosophy of everything. Most people aren't.
Can. And they are.
Yeah.
Because they are seen to favour me, right, with my. That's where
I think the laws actually are a little too lenient at the minute, but I think
I agree.
Yeah, but I think compared to like the US, we are.
So if yours was 13 weeks, give or take.
Yeah, I'm happy for people to go a bit over in certain circumstances, but you know, it's person by person.
Also with some special circumstances, I would put it to when the cortex is developed, and I would heavily pay attention to that research at all times to see whether or not that changes.
Yeah. And that's the thing. There is more research being done all the time. And I actually support the 24 weeks maybe being lowered a bit, closer to 22 or 20 at the minute. But we'll just kind of have to see where things go. Like the problem is lawmaking is slow and changes are slow.
So if you
and science is a bit quicker.
You said where you would go. If I had to make the law, I said where I would go. If you had to make the law, it was up to you. Where would you draw it and why? You had to. There's no way out. You have to draw the line somewhere.
It's difficult because what you're saying. I mean, I've told you that because I'm so unsure, my morality says that it's better to be safe than sorry.
Okay.
But
so day 2 you can't. Would that be accurate?
But I couldn't bring myself to say that would be a rational law.
No, but in this hypothetical, talking of philosophy, where I'm saying that it is you that has to make the
I would
law.
say that what you would have to do is you'd have to find the rough area in which you think humanhood begins and then push it back so you're in the safe zone.
But because you
and
haven't
if
done
you
that, because you haven't
me,
said about that criteria, where do you put it? It's okay if you say day 2. I just want to hear you say
it. I can't bring myself to do it because if you put me in a legislative assembly with a pen and parchment writing down, I couldn't do it. But I don't know where I'd put that line.
Is that because you don't feel you know enough about like the biological development?
No.
Or okay.
No, it's to do
personship
with personhood, which is a philosophical issue that I am in no position to judge.
Okay.
For that reason, perhaps if you held a gun to my head and forced me, I'd have to be safer than sorry. But I couldn't comfortably make that decision.
My last question would be, with that gun to your head and you had to put it somewhere, day 2 or day 1?
Just push it on you.
I don't know why, but I see such a problem with the day 1, day 2 distinction here.
How about I say...
And I won't come back, I just want to know your answer. Day 1 or day 2?
How about I say somewhere between...
Day 1 and day 2?
No, somewhere between just after that, giving enough time for immediate action to be taken.
Somewhere then, okay.
It's such an uncomfortable thing to talk about, but I want to think about it more before I say something that I regret, you know?
Yeah.
I'm sure people would understand that you are, you know...
And I want people to be aware of the fact that that this is very much me airing my uncertainty and hoping that anybody listening to this can hear the specific arguments that I'm making and perhaps suggest, even if they disagree, like you disagree with my criteria for abortion, but...
I don't understand your criteria. There is no criteria.
Well, okay, fair enough, but to those to those who understand what I'm saying even without agreeing with it, I'm hoping that some of those listening will perhaps be able to advise me on how I can flesh out that philosophy and how I can flesh out that date, based on what I've said. But I'm sure that give it a year, and I might be able to put a date on that for you.
Yeah, when that happens, I'll be interested.
We can have another conversation. I don't want people to go away thinking that because I've danced around the idea that it might be a plausible outcome to effectively ban abortion to this ridiculously early degree, that's when I think life begins, because that's not the case.
No, you haven't said that.
That's not what I'm saying, and I want that to be very clear. Yeah. I'm just saying that until we can be certain, it's not something that we can just be roundabout about.
I think we both agree with that.
It's something we need to be incredibly careful, because just consider for a second what happens if the pro-lifers are right. What happens if the Catholics are right? That life really does begin at conception. Then we're committing a Holocaust every day.
Of course.
If they're right. And they're like, I would wager that they're definitely wrong.
Why?
But if they are right, then this isn't just a matter of philosophical inquiry. This is the most important issue of our time. And so it's not something that we can treat lightly. And that's why I'm so reluctant to say that I can set a limit that's based on the development of pain receptors or the development of consciousness. Because if I'm wrong about that, and it's my hand that's made that law, then I have too much blood on my hand to count. And that's not something I'm comfortable doing.
The only factor I'd say that very honourable position neglects is the mother. Because it is necessary that these questions are asked and that they're dealt with, otherwise the woman may indeed be suffering and the child may suffer afterwards being born, etc.
You're right.
Because that question hasn't been sufficient.
You know what that makes this a moral emergency. It's something that we need to talk about more, and nobody wants to talk about it because everybody's too scared. You either got the pro-lifers who are too scared to say that they believe that abortion should always be illegal for fear of repercussion, and you've got the pro-choicers who are too scared because they're scared of the religious right coming for them.
You said that you're not
we need to have this
specifically
discussion.
knowledgeable on it. Maybe you would argue the same as me, but I can see people saying, actually, you're wrong. People are having these conversations. They are recognising it as the emergency, as what it is. These conversations have been had. They are being had right now. They're being developed. You are just ignorant on it.
Perhaps that's true.
And I do think
because of such,
there's one important topic that we haven't touched on today that I just want to very, very briefly mention, and that's the fact that even if we did make abortion illegal, people would still find a way to do it because some people are desperate.
Same thing with murder. Same thing with
true,
rape.
But it's better that things are done in a safe way that's better for the mother and the baby.
Abortion.
Surely you could say the same thing with murder.
But abortion is incredibly safe when done under medical assistance. When it's done by a coat hanger.
Well, it's not safe for the baby.
It's not for the baby, of course, but if we're just talking mother here, which I understand why you
But
wouldn't.
Look, this is why. Can I just reiterate why it's so important that we determine whether or not this is life? Because if this is life, then it's the same as if it's outside of the womb. And if you're going to say, well, if you don't let that mother kill that 3-year-old in a hospital, then they'll do it in a back alley and threaten both of their lives. That's a fatuous argument.
But also the baby as well, right? So often women in the past, when abortion was legal, would try and abort themselves and fail. And the baby would end up disfigured, they would end up hurt. Isn't it better that a baby, I would say, is killed before it can feel pain than it is born into a life where it's disfigured by its mother who didn't want it?
Well, now we're effectively asking the same question we were asking earlier, and that's something that's going to be a long thing to get into.
I know, it's tough. Anyway, this is very long. Our cameras have died and things are screwed up.
Sorry about the cameras,
guys. Don't worry. We've been filming all day, what time did I get here this morning? It was 11 a.m. or something. It's now 1 a.m. So it's been a long day.
It's been a very long day.
Yeah, and I think we're all kind of argued out. But go check out.
Oh, I'm never argued out.
Me neither.
I am. I'm argued out. Oh, I'm ready to go home and cuddle my dog.
Kyra, you don't give a shit about philosophy. Let's calm down.
That's the only baby I want.
Yeah, you still have to make it all the way back home. These two have travelled all the way from their respective parts of England to my humble
London.
abode. So I'm going to have a nice time this evening, just relaxing and going to bed. So I hope you two get home safely.
Gotta go get a night bus now.
Not that it matters. If you don't see what I'm hinting at there, then you can travel over to my channel. Link is in the description, I trust.
Just promoted yourself for me. I don't have to do it now.
Of course.
You just promote
I'm
me.
always promoting myself. There's never
go watch the video over on Stephen's channel and go check out Stephen's channel because it's really good. And I guess you could go look at Alex if you want.
If it's
if you must.
If you want to go and listen to the channel of some horrible misogynistic right-wing pro-life racist, then go ahead.
I do hope this conversation's taken.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for you both taking part.
This has been fun. It's been
appreciate it. I really
tough
do.
but fun.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, well, thanks to you too.
Amazing. Thank you to everyone listening. They're doing good if they lasted this long.
Yeah, if they're still here. Gosh.
Yeah.